Observer designation ZEF-9 floated in the biofluid chamber of the research vessel Contemplation's Edge, its crystalline neural matrix pulsing with the soft blue light of deep thought. The assignment parameters scrolled across its consciousness like bitter medicine: observe, analyze, report. Nothing more. The collective had been watching this species called humans for 3 standard cycles now, ever since they detected the first crude fusion signatures from their homeworld. The humans had been classified as Category 7 developing civilization, moderate technological advancement, primitive social structures, high aggression indices. Perfect subjects for the collective's ongoing study of warfare evolution among sapient species. ZEF-9 had observed 17 different species as they progressed through their violent phases. Most followed predictable patterns, tribal conflicts escalating to territorial wars, eventually culminating in either extinction or transcendence to peaceful coexistence. But something about the preliminary data on humans felt different. Their aggression patterns didn't match any known classification. They fought with a ferocity that suggested evolutionary pressure far beyond normal parameters, yet they also displayed moments of cooperation that defied logical explanation. The collective's xenobiologists were baffled by the contradictions in human nature. Observer ZEF-9, prepare for dimensional phase shift, announced the ship's consciousness. We are approaching the designated observation coordinates. ZEF-9 acknowledged the communication and began the mental preparations necessary for extended observation duty. The Contemplation's Edge utilized advanced dimensional phasing technology that rendered it completely undetectable to lower-tier civilizations. The humans would never know they were being watched, studied, catalogued like specimens in a laboratory. The phase shift completed with the familiar sensation of reality folding in on itself. Through the ship's sensory arrays, ZEF-9 could now perceive the human homeworld, a blue and green sphere that their species had designated Earth. The planet showed clear signs of industrialization, electromagnetic emissions, atmospheric pollution, and the geometric scars of urban development across multiple continents. Initial scans revealed a disturbing discovery. The humans were not engaged in the typical territorial disputes expected at their technological level. Instead, they were in the midst of what appeared to be a coordinated global conflict involving multiple nation-states and unprecedented levels of destruction. Nuclear weapons, a technology that should have taken them another 50 cycles to develop, were being deployed with alarming frequency. ZEF-9 adjusted its observation parameters and began detailed surveillance of the largest military engagement occurring on the planet's northern continent. Human forces from opposing factions were locked in brutal combat across a landscape that had been transformed into an alien hellscape of trenches, craters, and twisted metal. The first thing that struck ZEF-9 was the humans' apparent disregard for their own mortality. Soldiers charged across open ground into devastating weapons fire, not out of confusion or poor tactics, but with full knowledge that death was nearly certain. Yet they advanced anyway, driven by motivations that defied rational analysis. The collective's models predicted that any species would retreat under such circumstances, seeking alternative strategies or simply surrendering to preserve their genetic material. Through the ship's advanced sensors, ZEF-9 could observe individual human soldiers with startling clarity. One particular subject caught its attention, a young human male designated Human Alpha 7, who appeared to be in a position of command despite his obvious youth. The subject's biometric readings showed extreme stress levels that should have rendered him incapacitated, yet he continued to function with remarkable efficiency. Human Alpha 7 was coordinating the defense of a strategic position against overwhelming enemy forces. What fascinated ZEF-9 was not the tactical decisions being made, which were actually quite sound, but the emotional exchanges between the human commander and his subordinates. They displayed levels of mutual loyalty and willingness to sacrifice that exceeded anything in the collective's databases. "Johnson, take 3rd Squad in, hold that ridge line," Human Alpha 7 commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "Whatever happens, don't let them through." The subordinate human, clearly understanding that this was likely a death sentence, simply nodded and replied, "Yes, sir." "Give them hell, Lieutenant." ZEF-9 paused its observations to process this interaction. The subordinate human had acknowledged a direct order that would almost certainly result in his termination, yet he showed no signs of rebellion or self-preservation instincts. Instead, he appeared to take some form of satisfaction from the knowledge that his sacrifice would serve a larger purpose. This was not the behavior of any known sapient species. Even the most militaristic civilizations the collective had observed maintained strong self-preservation instincts that limited their willingness to engage in truly suicidal tactics. Yet humans seemed to embrace such actions as routine military procedure. Zeth-9 expanded its observation field to encompass the broader battlefield. What it discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about warfare evolution. The humans were not fighting for resources, territory, or even survival in the traditional sense. They were fighting for abstract concepts, ideas about governance, ideology, and social organization that existed only in their collective consciousness. The level of technological innovation occurring during active combat was equally unprecedented. Humans were developing new weapons systems, communication networks, and tactical doctrines in real time, often testing them immediately under battlefield conditions. Most species required peaceful periods for such innovation, as the stress of active warfare typically inhibited creative thinking. Humans appeared to thrive under such pressure. One observation particularly disturbed Zeth-9's analytical matrix. A human medical facility near the front lines was treating wounded soldiers from both sides of the conflict. According to all known warfare patterns, enemy wounded should be eliminated or abandoned to reduce future threats. Instead, human medical personnel were expending precious resources to preserve the lives of those who would likely return to combat against them. When questioned by military commanders, the chief medical officer, a female human designated Human Beta-3, responded with words that Zeth-9 recorded for later analysis: "They're wounded, Colonel. That makes them patients, not enemies. We'll save who we can and sort out the politics later." The colonel's response was equally puzzling: "Carry on, doctor. Just be careful out there." This exchange represented a fundamental contradiction in human nature that defied classification. They were simultaneously the most efficient killers the collective had ever observed and the most compassionate healers. These contradictory impulses existed within the same individuals, sometimes manifesting within minutes of each other. Zeth-9 decided to focus its observations on individual human subjects to better understand these paradoxes. It selected several soldiers from different factions and began detailed psychological analysis. The results were unlike anything in the collective's vast databases. Human Gamma-2 was a sniper who had eliminated 43 enemy combatants with remarkable precision. Yet when separated from his unit, he spent 2 days caring for an injured enemy soldier, sharing his limited food and water supplies despite the tactical disadvantage this created. When rescue forces finally arrived, Human Gamma-2 surrendered the enemy soldier to friendly medical personnel and then resumed his duties without apparent psychological conflict. Human Delta-5 was an engineer who specialized in creating explosive devices designed to maximize human casualties. Her innovations were responsible for hundreds of enemy deaths. However, during a temporary ceasefire, she used her expertise to clear mines and unexploded ordnance from civilian areas, working alongside enemy engineers in a cooperative effort that saved thousands of non-combatant lives. The pattern repeated across every subject Zeth-9 observed. Humans possessed an unprecedented capacity for both destruction and creation, often switching between these modes with startling rapidity. They could eliminate enemies with ruthless efficiency while simultaneously risking their lives to save civilians they had never met. Even more puzzling was their treatment of prisoners of war. Instead of the expected elimination or enslavement patterns, humans had developed elaborate codes governing the treatment of captured enemies. These codes were largely honored even when doing so created tactical disadvantages or resource burdens. Zeth-9 observed a prisoner exchange that illustrated this phenomenon. Human and enemy forces had agreed to a temporary truce to exchange wounded captives. During the exchange, both sides provided medical care and supplies to their former prisoners, treating them with a level of respect typically reserved for allies. The commanding officers from both factions even engaged in what appeared to be a ritualistic consumption of stimulants together, a behavior their databases indicated was called sharing coffee. This social bonding between active enemies was unprecedented in collective observations. "Damn good coffee, Major," commented the human commander to his counterpart. "My compliments to your supply officer." "Ha! Wait until you taste what we're serving next month. New shipment from the southern colonies. Assuming we're still shooting at each other by then. Both officers laughed at this exchange, as if the prospect of resuming deadly combat was merely an occupational inconvenience rather than a matter of life and death. Zeth-9's analytical subroutines began generating error messages as it attempted to categorize these behaviors. Every established model for sapient warfare patterns was failing to accommodate human responses. The collective would need to develop entirely new classification systems. The technological implications were equally disturbing. Humans were advancing their military capabilities at a rate that defied all known development curves. In just the 3 cycles the collective had been observing them, human weapons systems had evolved from chemical-based projectile weapons to fusion-powered energy systems. Their spacecraft had progressed from primitive chemical rockets to basic fusion drives capable of interplanetary travel. At their current rate of advancement, humans would achieve interstellar capability within 10 to 15 cycles. This was unprecedented for a species still engaged in global warfare. Most civilizations achieved interstellar travel only after transcending their violent phases and dedicating their resources to peaceful exploration. Zeph-9 began to suspect that human aggression might not be a developmental phase to be outgrown, but rather an integral part of their evolutionary strategy. Their capacity for violence appeared to be directly linked to their innovative capabilities and their willingness to take extraordinary risks. A particularly disturbing observation occurred when Zeph-9 witnessed human forces defending a research facility against overwhelming enemy numbers. Instead of evacuating their scientific personnel and abandoning their equipment, the humans chose to fight to the death to protect their research. The scientists themselves took up weapons and fought alongside the military personnel. The research being protected was not weapons development, but rather a project focused on medical treatments for a disease affecting enemy civilians. The humans were willing to die to protect research that would primarily benefit their enemies. Such behavior patterns had no precedent in collective databases. As the first observational period concluded, Zeph-9 found itself facing unprecedented analytical challenges. Every assumption about warfare evolution, species development, and rational behavior was being challenged by human actions. The collective's models suggested that humanity should have either achieved transcendence or self-destructed long ago. Instead, humans appeared to be thriving in their contradictory state, using their violent tendencies as a catalyst for unprecedented innovation and their compassionate impulses to maintain social cohesion despite ongoing conflicts. They were simultaneously their own greatest threat and their own most effective protection. The most disturbing realization was that humans were becoming more effective warriors not in spite of their compassionate impulses, but because of them. Their willingness to sacrifice for abstract ideals, to protect non-combatants, and to honor codes of conduct even when disadvantageous was creating a form of military effectiveness that exceeded anything in collective databases. Zeph-9 transmitted its initial observations to the collective, along with a request for extended observation time and additional analytical resources. The response was immediate and unprecedented. All other observation missions were to be suspended, and the full resources of the research vessel would be dedicated to the human study. The collective was as disturbed by these initial findings as Zeph-9 had been. Humanity represented something new in their vast catalog of sapient species, a civilization that defied classification and challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of intelligence, aggression, and social organization. As Zeph-9 prepared for the second phase of observation, it experienced something that might have been described as apprehension if it had been capable of such emotions. The humans were not following any known developmental pattern. They were writing their own rules, creating new paradigms, and advancing in directions that no previous species had explored. The collective had observed the rise and fall of thousands of civilizations, always confident in their ability to predict outcomes based on established patterns. But humanity was unprecedented. They were neither purely violent nor purely peaceful, neither completely rational nor entirely emotional. They were something new, something that challenged the very foundations of what the collective understood about sapient life. And, if the initial observations were accurate, humanity was advancing toward interstellar capability while retaining all of their violent capabilities and contradictory impulses. The implications of a spacefaring human civilization were too disturbing to fully contemplate. Zeph-9 settled deeper into its observation protocols, knowing that the second phase of study would be crucial for understanding whether humanity represented a new form of sapient evolution or simply an anomaly that would eventually conform to established patterns. Either way, the collective needed to understand humans completely before they achieved the ability to leave their homeworld. The future of galactic civilization might depend on it. 3 cycles into the observation mission, Zeph-9 had catalogued enough human behavior patterns to fill 17 standard data matrices, yet every new observation seemed to contradict previous findings. The collective's xenobiologists had transmitted urgent requests for more detailed analysis, particularly regarding human decision-making processes under extreme stress conditions. The global conflict had escalated beyond anything in recorded galactic history. Humans were now deploying weapons capable of rendering entire continents uninhabitable, yet they continued to maintain civilian populations, cultural institutions, and scientific research programs as if the possibility of total extinction was merely a minor inconvenience. Zeth-9 had relocated its primary observation focus to a massive naval engagement occurring in the planet's largest ocean. Human fleets from opposing factions were locked in a complex battle involving hundreds of vessels, aerial support craft, and underwater assault units. The scale of coordination required for such operations should have been beyond the capabilities of a species still in its violent developmental phase. What particularly intrigued Zeth-9 was the discovery that many of the human commanders had previously served together in earlier conflicts before political divisions placed them on opposing sides. Instead of the expected hatred or professional distance, these former allies maintained a complex relationship that combined tactical respect with personal regret. Admiral designation Human Epsilon-1 was commanding the Northern Fleet against his former protege, Human Epsilon-2, who now led the opposing forces. Radio intercepts revealed communications between the two commanders that defied every known protocol for military engagement. "Sarah, this is Admiral Morrison on emergency frequency 7, transmitted Human Epsilon-1 during a brief lull in combat. I need you to know that this isn't personal." "I know, Tom," came the reply from Human Epsilon-2. "Orders are orders. But I'm still going to sink your flagship if I get the chance. Wouldn't expect anything less. Just watch out for the new torpedo spread pattern. Your defensive screens aren't configured for it. Thanks for the warning. My gunners have been working on something you haven't seen yet either. Should make for an interesting afternoon." Both commanders then resumed full-scale combat operations against each other, each attempting to achieve complete tactical victory while apparently maintaining genuine concern for their opponent's welfare. Zeth-9's analytical matrix generated cascade errors attempting to process the logical contradictions involved. The battle that followed demonstrated human capabilities that exceeded collective predictions by several orders of magnitude. Individual ship commanders displayed tactical innovation in real time, adapting to new threats and opportunities with creativity that suggested their neurological development was specifically optimized for warfare conditions. Human Zeta-3 commanded a destroyer that had lost primary weapons systems and main propulsion. Instead of surrendering or abandoning ship according to standard military doctrine, the human crew converted their vessel into a kinetic projectile aimed at the enemy's largest battleship. They succeeded in crippling the enemy vessel while somehow managing to evacuate most of their crew to safety using improvised escape pods. The enemy battleship's crew, rather than allowing Human Zeta-3 and their people to drown in the ocean, immediately deployed rescue vessels to recover the humans who had just attempted to kill them. This pattern of combat followed by rescue repeated throughout the engagement, creating a bizarre cycle where the same humans alternately try to destroy and save each other. Zeth-9 expanded its analysis to examine the civilian populations supporting these military operations. What it discovered challenged every assumption about resource allocation during warfare. Despite massive military expenditures, human governments continued funding education, medical research, arts programs, and even entertainment industries. On one continent, humans were simultaneously manufacturing weapons capable of leveling cities while also building new hospitals, schools, and cultural centers. Scientists worked on both destructive military technologies and life-saving medical treatments, often the same individuals contributing to both efforts without apparent psychological conflict. Doctor designation Human Theta-1 was particularly fascinating. During the day, she led a team developing more efficient fusion weapons for military deployment. In the evenings, she volunteered at a civilian hospital treating war refugees from enemy territories. When questioned about this apparent contradiction by a colleague, her response baffled Zeth-9's linguistic analysis programs. The weapons are to end the war faster. The medical work is to save the people caught in it. Both are necessary. The colleague's acceptance of this explanation as logical indicated that such thinking was normal among humans, not an aberration. Zeth-9 decided to examine human educational systems to understand how these contradictory thought patterns were developed. What it discovered was unprecedented in galactic civilization. Humans were simultaneously teaching their young about the horrors of war and training them to be more effective warriors. History classes included detailed studies of past conflicts, emphasizing both the devastating costs of warfare and the heroic sacrifices made by previous generations. Students learned about the development of increasingly destructive weapons while also studying the humanitarian laws designed to limit warfare's impact on civilian populations. Even more puzzling, human children played elaborate games that simulated combat scenarios, developing tactical thinking and competitive instincts while also learning cooperation, loyalty, and protective behaviors toward their peers. These games appeared to be preparing them for both the violent and compassionate aspects of human society. A typical human educational facility observed by Zeth-9 included classes on military history, conflict resolution, advanced mathematics for weapons engineering, medical treatment for combat injuries, and philosophical discussions about the morality of warfare. Students absorbed all of this information without displaying the cognitive dissonance that should have resulted from such contradictory messaging. During one observed class period, human students aged approximately 15 standard years engaged in a debate about the ethics of using fusion weapons against civilian targets. The discussion was sophisticated, nuanced, and reached conclusions that would have been appropriate for advanced xenobiologists. Yet these same students were also being trained in small unit tactics and weapons operation as part of their standard curriculum. The teacher, Human Ada 5, guided the discussion with statements that crystallized the human paradox: war is humanity's greatest failure and our most revealing test. We must prepare for it while hoping never to use that preparation. Those who are best at ending conflicts quickly are often those who understand their costs most deeply. Zeth-9's analytical routine struggled to process the implications of a society that could simultaneously embrace such contradictory principles. According to all collective models, this should have resulted in social fragmentation, cognitive paralysis, or evolutionary stagnation. Instead, humans appeared to be thriving under the tension between opposing impulses. The observation period's most significant discovery occurred when Zeth-9 detected an unauthorized transmission from the human homeworld directed toward a nearby star system. Initial analysis suggested it was a distress signal, but detailed examination revealed something far more concerning: humans had detected the presence of non-terrestrial intelligence. The transmission was not a general broadcast but a carefully constructed message directed at specific coordinates where the collective maintained monitoring stations. Somehow, despite their primitive technology and the Contemplation's Edge's advanced stealth systems, humans had become aware they were being observed. The message itself was brief but demonstrated that human intelligence capabilities exceeded all previous estimates. We know you're out there watching us. We know you're studying how we fight. If you want to understand humanity, you need to understand that we're not performing for your benefit. This is who we are. If that concerns you, perhaps we should talk. Zeth-9 immediately transmitted an emergency communication to the collective leadership. The response was swift and unprecedented: maintain observation protocols while preparing for potential first contact scenarios. Under no circumstances should the research vessel reveal its presence until further orders were received. However, human technological advancement continued to accelerate beyond predicted parameters. Within days of the unauthorized transmission, human observation systems had achieved sufficient sophistication to track the Contemplation's Edge despite its dimensional phasing. They couldn't achieve direct contact, but they clearly knew the vessel's approximate location and movement patterns. This development forced Zeth-9 to confront a disturbing possibility: humans might be the first species to achieve interstellar awareness before achieving interstellar travel. They were developing sensors capable of detecting advanced alien technology while still relying on primitive chemical rockets for transportation. The implications were staggering. If humans could detect and potentially communicate with galactic civilizations while still in their aggressive developmental phase, it would fundamentally alter the collective's contact protocols. Every previous first contact had occurred only after a species had achieved peaceful transcendence and developed interstellar travel capabilities. Humans were breaking every rule in the Galactic Development Handbook. Zeth-9 continued monitoring human military operations while trying to understand how they had achieved such rapid technological advancement. The answer appeared to be their unique approach to innovation under pressure. Instead of requiring peaceful conditions for research and development, humans seemed to thrive on the intellectual challenges presented by warfare. Their most advanced technologies were being developed not in isolated laboratories but on active battlefields where immediate practical application was required. This accelerated testing and refinement process was producing technological advancement rates that defied all known models. A human research facility designated Installation 7 had been developing faster-than-light communication systems while simultaneously serving as a military command center for regional operations. The researchers were literally inventing interstellar communication technology between artillery bombardments from enemy forces. When the facility came under direct attack, the research team refused evacuation orders and continued working even as the building was being destroyed around them. Their final transmission before the facility's destruction was a complete technical specification for an Ansible communication system that exceeded collective capabilities by several technological generations. The transmission was received by multiple human facilities across the planet and immediately put into production despite the ongoing global conflict. Within weeks, humans had established instantaneous communication networks spanning their entire homeworld, using technology that should have required centuries of peaceful development. Even more disturbing was the realization that humans were sharing this advanced technology freely between opposing factions. The same Ansible systems were being used by all sides in the conflict, apparently because humans valued the advancement of their species more than temporary military advantages. This pattern repeated across every field of human endeavor. Medical advances were shared between enemies, scientific discoveries were published openly despite their military applications, and technological innovations were distributed without regard for national boundaries or political affiliations. Humans appeared to operate under the assumption that their species' advancement as a whole was more important than any individual faction's temporary victory. This long-term thinking combined with their aggressive short-term tactics created a civilization unlike anything in the collective's databases. Zeth-9's continuous observation revealed another disturbing trend: humans were beginning to develop technologies specifically designed for space-based warfare. Not exploration or peaceful contact, but combat in zero-gravity environments against potential alien adversaries. The same Installation 7 that had developed Ansible communication had also been working on directed energy weapons optimized for vacuum conditions, armor systems designed for protection against unknown alien weapon types, and tactical doctrines for fighting enemies with superior technology. Humans were not just preparing to join galactic civilization peacefully. They were preparing to fight for their place in it if necessary. This realization sent shock waves through Zeth-9's analytical matrix. The collective had always assumed that first contact with developing civilizations would involve a peaceful species that had transcended violence. The standard protocol involved gradual introduction to galactic civilization, mentorship in advanced technologies, and eventual integration into the collective as junior partners. Humans were preparing for an entirely different scenario. They were developing under the assumption that galactic civilization might be hostile and that they would need to fight for survival against technologically superior opponents. Their entire approach to advancement was being shaped by the expectation of conflict. Worse, their rapid technological development suggested they might actually be capable of mounting effective resistance against advanced alien civilizations. Their innovations in warfare, their ability to function under extreme pressure, and their willingness to sacrifice for abstract ideals could make them formidable opponents even against superior technology. The final observation that completed Zeth-9's analysis of human warfare capabilities occurred when human forces achieved their first successful test of faster-than-light travel. The test was conducted not by peaceful explorers or scientific researchers, but by a military vessel equipped with weapon systems designed for interstellar combat. The human ship designation Defiance achieved a brief faster-than-light jump while carrying enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Its first transmission upon returning to normal space was not a message of peace or scientific achievement, but a tactical report on the weapon system's performance during FTL conditions. Humans had achieved interstellar travel capability while maintaining full military readiness. They were not transcending violence to reach the stars, they were bringing their capacity for warfare with them. As the second observation period concluded, Zeth-9 found itself facing conclusions that challenged the very foundations of collective civilization. Humanity represented something unprecedented, a species capable of achieving advanced technology without abandoning their violent nature, of maintaining compassionate ideals while preparing for the worst-case scenarios, of cooperation and competition simultaneously. They were not evolving according to known patterns. They were creating new evolutionary pathways that no previous species had explored. And they were doing so at a rate that would bring them into contact with galactic civilization within a very short time frame. The collective would need to decide quickly whether humans represented an opportunity for unprecedented cooperation or an existential threat to everything they had built. Either way, the galaxy was about to change in ways that no one could predict. Zeth-9 transmitted its second phase observations to the collective with a recommendation for immediate strategic planning sessions. Humanity was no longer a subject for passive observation. They were becoming active participants in galactic affairs whether the collective was ready or not. The emergency session of the collective's High Council had lasted for 6 standard cycles, an unprecedented duration for a species evaluation conference. Zeth-9 remained in observation position around Earth while the galaxy's most advanced civilizations debated what to do about humanity. The decision, when it finally came, was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The collective would make first contact immediately, while humans were still in their violent phase, in an attempt to guide their development before they achieved full interstellar capability. It was a desperate measure that violated 10,000 years of established protocol, but the alternative, waiting for humans to arrive in galactic space with their full military potential, was considered too dangerous to risk. Zeth-9 received new orders along with a complete diplomatic contact team, establish communication with human leadership, assess their intentions regarding galactic civilization, and attempt to negotiate limitations on their military development in exchange for advanced peaceful technologies. If negotiations failed, Zeth-9 was authorized to recommend more direct interventions. The contact protocol began with a carefully crafted message transmitted on the same frequency humans had used for their earlier unauthorized communication. The message identified the collective as representatives of galactic civilization and requested diplomatic dialogue regarding humanity's future among the stars. The human response arrived within minutes and immediately demonstrated why the collective was so concerned about this species. Instead of the expected awe, gratitude, or fear that typically characterized first contact responses, humans replied with what could only be described as polite wariness mixed with tactical assessment. "Greetings, representatives of the Galactic Collective," came the response from a human designation General Patricia Hayes, speaking for something called the United Earth Defense Council. "We appreciate your willingness to establish communication. We have several questions about your intentions, your capabilities, and your expectations for this dialogue. We also want to make clear from the beginning that while we're interested in peaceful cooperation, we will not accept any attempts to limit our sovereignty or our right to defend ourselves." The response continued with a series of specific questions about collective military capabilities, territorial boundaries, resource conflicts, and historical precedents for contact with developing civilizations. Humans were treating first contact as a potential military negotiation rather than a peaceful exchange of knowledge. Worse, the questions demonstrated that humans had somehow acquired detailed information about galactic civilization that should have been impossible for them to obtain. They knew about the collective structure, its member species, and even some details about past first contact scenarios with other civilizations. Zeth-9 transmitted a query to the collective requesting clarification on possible information leaks, but the response was immediate and disturbing: no information had been leaked. Humans had somehow deduced the structure and nature of galactic civilization through pure analysis of the collective's observation activities. This realization sent shock waves through the diplomatic team. Humans possessed intelligence analysis capabilities that exceeded those of species with 10 times their technological development. They had essentially reverse-engineered the existence and nature of galactic civilization from minimal observational data. The first formal diplomatic exchange took place in Earth's orbital space, with human representatives meeting aboard the Contemplation's Edge after it dropped its dimensional phasing. The human delegation arrived in a spacecraft that should have been impossible for their technological level, a fusion-powered vessel equipped with defensive systems and weapons that incorporated principles the collective had assumed were far beyond human understanding. General Hayes led the human delegation, accompanied by scientists, military advisors, and what humans designated as philosophers, individuals apparently responsible for analyzing the moral and ethical implications of contact with alien civilizations. No previous species had thought to include moral philosophers in first contact delegations. The humans' first action upon boarding the collective vessel was to conduct what they called a security assessment, essentially a detailed intelligence gathering operation disguised as diplomatic courtesy. They politely requested tours of the ship's systems, asked pointed questions about collective technology, and somehow managed to scan the vessel's defensive capabilities without triggering any security protocols. By the end of the first formal meeting, humans had acquired enough technical information to begin developing countermeasures against most collective technologies. They did this while maintaining perfect diplomatic protocol and expressing genuine gratitude for the opportunity to establish peaceful relations. Zeth-9 found itself developing something that might have been described as professional respect for human capabilities, if it had been capable of such emotions. They were simultaneously conducting espionage and diplomacy with equal skill, preparing for conflict while pursuing cooperation, and gathering intelligence while maintaining genuine interest in peaceful outcomes. The negotiations quickly revealed fundamental differences between human and galactic approaches to civilization. The collective operated under principles of peaceful coexistence, resource sharing, and gradual technological advancement under careful supervision. Humans operated under principles of competitive cooperation, resource security, and rapid technological advancement through necessity-driven innovation. We understand your concerns about our military development, General Hayes explained during one session. But you need to understand our perspective. We've spent our entire evolutionary history surrounded by threats, natural disasters, resource scarcity, competing groups, environmental challenges. Our survival has always depended on our ability to adapt, fight, and overcome obstacles through determination and innovation. Your species has achieved peaceful transcendence, she continued. That's admirable, and it's clearly served you well. But asking us to abandon our defensive capabilities while we're still learning about galactic civilization is like asking us to remove our immune systems because we've been invited to a dinner party. We don't know what we might encounter out there. The collective's diplomatic response emphasized the safety and stability of galactic civilization, the protection offered by membership in the collective, and the benefits of peaceful technological advancement. Humans listened politely and, then, asked for detailed information about every military conflict in galactic history, every territorial dispute, every instance of resource competition, and every case where the collective's protection had failed to prevent harm to member species. When the collective's representatives admitted that such incidents had occurred, humans nodded knowingly and continued developing their military capabilities while participating in diplomatic negotiations. The breakthrough in understanding came when Zeph-9 was granted permission to observe human decision-making processes during the negotiations. What it discovered challenged every assumption about the relationship between intelligence and aggression. Humans were not violent despite their intelligence, they were intelligent because of their capacity for violence. Their entire cognitive development had been shaped by the need to solve complex problems under pressure, to cooperate with allies while competing against enemies, and to innovate rapidly when survival was at stake. The same neurological pathways that made them effective warriors also made them creative problem solvers, innovative engineers, and adaptable strategists. Their capacity for violence was inseparable from their capacity for advancement, cooperation, and moral reasoning. Dr. Designation Human Lambda 7, one of the philosophers in the human delegation, explained this concept during a private discussion with Zeph-9. Violence isn't something we do because we're primitive. It's something we're capable of because we're human. The same mental processes that let us imagine better ways to destroy our enemies also let us imagine better ways to help our friends, explore the universe, and create beautiful things. We don't want to fight you, she continued. We'd much rather cooperate, trade, learn from each other, and explore the galaxy together. But the reason we're good partners is the same reason we're dangerous enemies. We don't compromise when it comes to protecting what we value. This insight forced Zeph-9 to reconsider everything it had observed about human warfare. Humans weren't violent despite their capacity for cooperation, they were cooperative because of their capacity for violence. Their willingness to fight for their beliefs made their beliefs more trustworthy. Their ability to be dangerous made their choice to be peaceful more meaningful. The diplomatic negotiations reached a critical juncture when the collective attempted to establish what they considered reasonable limitations on human military development in exchange for advanced peaceful technologies. The human response was immediate and non-negotiable. They would accept no limitations on their right to self-defense, but they were willing to establish mutual non-aggression agreements and cooperative frameworks for peaceful interaction. We'll agree not to attack anyone who doesn't attack us, General Hayes stated firmly. We'll share technologies that benefit everyone, cooperate on scientific research, and work together to solve problems that affect multiple species. But we won't disarm ourselves or accept restrictions on our ability to protect ourselves and our allies. If that's not acceptable to your collective, then we'll develop our own path to the stars. We'd prefer to do it with friends, but we'll do it alone if necessary. The collective's response to this ultimatum revealed deep fractures in galactic civilization that humans had somehow detected and were now exploiting with surgical precision. Some member species supported the human position, arguing that diversity of approach strengthened galactic civilization. Others demanded immediate military action to prevent humanity from achieving full interstellar capability. Zeph-9 watched in fascination as humans leveraged these divisions to their advantage without ever directly threatening anyone. They simply continued their technological development while maintaining diplomatic relations with individual species rather than the collective as a whole. Within cycles, several advanced civilizations had established separate bilateral relationships with humanity, effectively bypassing the collective entirely. The human strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. They offered something no other species could provide: genuine innovation driven by competitive pressure. While the collective had achieved technological stagnation through peaceful cooperation, humans were developing new solutions to old problems at unprecedented rates. Species that had been struggling with energy limitations for millennia suddenly had access to human fusion technology that surpassed anything in their databases. Civilizations dealing with resource scarcity found human mining and processing techniques that revolutionized their capabilities. Medical challenges that had puzzled galactic scientists for ages were solved by human researchers who approached problems from entirely different perspectives. The price for this cooperation was simple: recognition of humanity's right to maintain its defensive capabilities and sovereignty over its own development. Most species found this a reasonable exchange, especially when human military technology proved equally valuable for peaceful applications. A critical moment came when the Zephyrian Empire, one of the collective's founding members, formally requested human assistance with a territorial dispute involving a non-collective species called the Devourers. The Devourers had been systematically consuming Zephyrian colonies for decades, and traditional collective diplomatic approaches had failed completely. Humans agreed to provide assistance, but their approach differed radically from expected collective protocols. Instead of attempting further negotiations or establishing defensive positions, humans launched what they called a demonstration of resolve. A single human vessel, the same Defiance that had achieved their first FTL jump, arrived in the disputed system and transmitted a simple message to the Devourer fleet: "You have 1 hour to withdraw from Zephyrian space. After that, we will consider your presence an act of aggression against our allies." The Devourer response was predictable: they attacked the solitary human vessel with overwhelming force. What happened next sent shock waves throughout galactic civilization. The Defiance not only survived the assault but systematically destroyed the entire Devourer fleet using tactics and technologies that no one had ever seen before. Human weapons systems adapted in real time to counter Devourer defenses, their ship maneuvered in ways that defied conventional physics, and their crew functioned under combat stress that would have incapacitated any other known species. The battle lasted less than an hour, and, when it was over, humanity had established itself as the galaxy's most effective military force despite being the newest and least technologically advanced species by traditional measurements. The aftermath of the Devourer incident fundamentally altered galactic politics. Species that had been skeptical of human capabilities now sought their protection. Civilizations that had opposed human military development now competed to establish defense agreements with them. The collective found itself irrelevant in many regions of space as bilateral human relationships replaced multilateral collective governance. Zeph 9's final observations of this phase focused on how humans managed these new relationships. Instead of establishing dominance or demanding tribute like previous galactic powers, humans operated according to what they called defensive alliances, agreements to provide military protection in exchange for peaceful cooperation and mutual benefit. These alliances were unlike anything in galactic history. Humans genuinely seemed to prefer peaceful cooperation but were willing to use overwhelming force against anyone who threatened their allies. They established no territorial claims, demanded no subjugation, and imposed no ideological requirements beyond basic non-aggression. The result was a new form of galactic civilization based on voluntary cooperation backed by credible defensive capability. Species joined human alliance networks not because they were forced to, but because they recognized the benefits of being protected by the galaxy's most effective warriors while maintaining their autonomy and cultural independence. Dr. Human Lambda 7 explained the philosophy during a final meeting with Zeph 9. "We learned long ago that the best way to avoid fighting is to be so obviously capable of winning that no one wants to fight you. We protect our friends not because we want to control them, but because having friends worth protecting makes us stronger than having subjects who resent us. The galaxy is big enough for everyone to find their own path," she continued. "Our job isn't to tell other species how to live, it's to make sure no one can force them to live differently than they choose." As the third observation period concluded, Zeph 9 found itself contemplating implications that extended far beyond its original mission parameters. Humanity had not only achieved interstellar capability while retaining their violent nature, they had used that nature to create a new form of galactic civilization that was more dynamic, more innovative, and, paradoxically, more peaceful than anything the collective had achieved. The collective's model of enforced pacification had created stability at the cost of stagnation. Humanity's model of protected autonomy was creating progress through voluntary cooperation backed by defensive capability. But Zeph 9's analysis also revealed a disturbing trend: humanity's rapid expansion and growing influence were creating tensions with species that preferred the old order. Several powerful civilizations viewed human success as a direct threat to their own positions in galactic hierarchy. Storm clouds were gathering on the galactic horizon, and Zeth-9 suspected that humanity's greatest test was yet to come. They had proven they could win individual battles and establish successful alliances. But, could they survive a coordinated effort by multiple advanced civilizations determined to eliminate the human threat before it became too powerful to stop? The answer to that question would determine not just humanity's fate, but the future structure of galactic civilization itself. The conspiracy began in the deepest sectors of space, far from human observation networks, where three of the galaxy's most ancient and powerful civilizations gathered to discuss what they termed the human problem. Zeth-9 detected the clandestine meeting through quantum signature analysis, but the implications of what it observed would haunt its analytical matrix for cycles to come. The hegemony of eternal order, the dominion of absolute logic, and the empire of perfect harmony represented over 50,000 years of galactic leadership. These were civilizations that had transcended violence so completely that they had forgotten how to wage war effectively. But they remembered how to coordinate, how to plan, and how to eliminate threats to their vision of galactic perfection. Their discussion, intercepted through long-range quantum resonance scanning, revealed the depth of their concern about humanity's growing influence. In less than 5 cycles, humans had fundamentally altered galactic civilization's power structure. Alliance networks that had taken millennia to establish were crumbling as species chose human protection over traditional collective membership. The infection spreads faster than our models predicted, transmitted the hegemony's prime coordinator. 17 major civilizations have established bilateral defense agreements with humanity. 43 minor species have requested human protection from regional conflicts. The humans are systematically dismantling 10,000 years of carefully maintained order. More concerning is their influence on developing civilizations, added the Dominion's logic prime. Species that would normally transcend violence during their advancement phase are instead adopting human military philosophies. They see humanity's success and conclude that maintaining defensive capabilities is beneficial rather than primitive. The Empire's Harmony speaker provided the most chilling assessment. Psychological analysis indicates that exposure to human thinking patterns is fundamentally altering how other species approach problem solving. They are becoming more innovative, more risk-accepting, more willing to challenge established authority. If this continues, galactic civilization will become chaotic, unpredictable, and ultimately ungovernable. Zeth-9 transmitted these intelligence findings to human leadership through established diplomatic channels, expecting them to respond with defensive preparations or diplomatic outreach to counter the conspiracy. Instead, the human response demonstrated their most terrifying capability: strategic patience combined with tactical aggression. Humanity did nothing. No military mobilization, no diplomatic protests, no intelligence operations against the conspirators. Human forces continued their normal operations, alliance networks continued expanding through voluntary agreements, and technological development proceeded at its accelerated pace. To external observers, humans appeared completely unaware of the threat forming against them. But Zeth-9's continued observation revealed the subtle preparations occurring beneath the surface of apparent normalcy. Human military exercises began incorporating scenarios involving coordinated attacks by multiple technologically superior opponents. Research priorities shifted toward defensive technologies and rapid deployment capabilities. Most tellingly, humans began sharing certain advanced military technologies with their allies, not the most cutting-edge systems, but capabilities sufficient to make human alliance members significantly more dangerous than before. The conspiracy's first direct action came in the form of economic warfare. The three ancient civilizations used their influence to restrict access to rare resources that human technology required, hoping to slow human development and force them into dependence on collective-controlled supply networks. Humanity's response was swift and devastating in its implications. Within weeks, human mining operations had identified alternative resource sources in unexplored systems, developed new processing techniques that reduced rare material requirements, and established trade relationships with species outside the collective's economic sphere. But the humans went further. They freely shared these innovations with any species interested in reducing dependence on collective-controlled resources. The result was an economic revolution that undermined thousands of years of carefully maintained trade dependencies. Suddenly, species that had been economically bound to the collective found themselves with alternatives. The ancient civilization's economic leverage, one of their primary tools for maintaining galactic order, evaporated almost overnight. The conspiracy's second attempt involved information warfare designed to portray humans as a militaristic threat to galactic peace. Sophisticated propaganda campaigns highlighted human weapons development, military exercises, and alliance building while ignoring their defensive nature and peaceful intentions. The human response to this campaign revealed another terrifying aspect of their capabilities: they were better at information warfare than civilizations with 50,000 years of experience. Instead of directly countering the propaganda, humans simply invited any interested species to observe their operations directly. They opened their military facilities to inspection, shared detailed information about their weapons capabilities and intended applications, and encouraged direct communication with human alliance members about their experiences. The transparency was devastating to the conspiracy's credibility. When species could see for themselves that human military preparations were defensive and that human allies maintained complete autonomy, the propaganda campaigns collapsed under the weight of observable reality. Worse for the conspirators, the humans turned the information war against them by asking simple questions that exposed fundamental contradictions in the ancient civilization's positions. If the collective truly supported peace and cooperation, why were they trying to restrict humanity's access to resources and allies? If they believed in self-determination for all species, why were they attempting to limit human technological development? These questions forced other species to examine the power structures they had accepted for millennia, and many didn't like what they discovered. The third and most desperate attempt by the conspiracy involved direct military intervention disguised as peacekeeping operations. The hegemony, dominion, and empire coordinated their fleets to establish security zones around human allied systems, ostensibly to prevent conflicts but actually to isolate human influence and demonstrate the futility of resisting ancient authority. This was the moment Zeth-9 had been dreading, the first direct military confrontation between humanity and the galaxy's most established powers. The outcome would determine whether humans were truly as dangerous as they appeared or whether their success had been due to facing relatively weak opponents. The human response began with a single transmission sent to all three fleets simultaneously: "Your presence in our allies' space constitutes an act of aggression. You have 24 hours to withdraw to neutral territory. If you refuse, we will interpret your actions as a declaration of war against the human alliance network." The ancient civilization's leaders dismissed this warning as primitive bluster from a species with barely 5 cycles of space travel experience. They had fleets numbering in the thousands of vessels, weapons systems refined over millennia, and military doctrines proven effective across countless conflicts with lesser species. Humanity had a few dozen ships and no significant military history beyond their homeworld. The battle that followed became known as the Demonstration of Terra and fundamentally altered every civilization's understanding of warfare, technology, and the nature of intelligence itself. The humans didn't attack the ancient fleets directly. Instead, they systematically dismantled them using tactics that no one had ever imagined, technologies that shouldn't have existed, and coordination that defied current understanding of command and control systems. Human ships appeared and disappeared using stealth technologies that made them effectively invisible to ancient sensors. Their weapons ignored traditional defensive systems by operating on physical principles that the ancient civilizations had never encountered. Most disturbing of all, human forces seemed to predict enemy movements with impossible accuracy, as if they could see the future. The hegemony lost 60% of its fleet in the first hour without managing to damage a single human vessel. The Dominion's logical battle computers, designed to calculate optimal strategies against any opponent, simply shut down when confronted with human tactical patterns that contained no discernible logic. The Empire's harmonious coordination systems, refined over millennia of collective action, were disrupted by human electronic warfare capabilities that turned their own ships against each other. When the 24-hour deadline expired, humanity's total losses were 0 killed, 0 wounded, and 0 vessels damaged. The ancient civilizations had lost thousands of ships and hundreds of thousands of crew members. But the most terrifying aspect of the demonstration wasn't the destruction, it was the precision. Humans had carefully avoided killing any enemy personnel who weren't directly threatening human or allied forces. They disabled ships rather than destroying them, captured crews rather than eliminating them, and provided medical assistance to wounded enemies even while continuing combat operations. The message was clear: humanity could have eliminated the ancient fleets completely if they had chosen to do so. The fact that they chose restraint made them more frightening, not less. Admiral designation Human Sigma 1, commanding the human forces, transmitted a final message to the surviving ancient fleets: this was a demonstration, not a war. We could have destroyed you completely, but we chose not to because we prefer peace to conquest. However, if you attack our allies again, we will respond with considerably less restraint. The choice of war or peace is yours, but understand that you cannot win a war against us. The aftermath of the demonstration sent shock waves throughout galactic civilization. The three ancient powers, humiliated and militarily neutered, withdrew to their home systems and ceased their interference with human activities. But their defeat created a power vacuum that dozens of other civilizations attempted to fill. Zeph-9 observed with growing alarm as previously stable regions of space descended into conflict as species that had been held in check by ancient authority now pursued their own territorial and resource ambitions. The careful order that had maintained galactic peace for millennia was collapsing, and emerging conflicts were creating exactly the kind of chaotic conditions that humans thrived in. Worse, some species had learned the wrong lesson from the demonstration. Instead of recognizing humanity's preference for peace backed by strength, they concluded that only military power mattered in the new galactic order. Arms races began breaking out across multiple sectors as civilizations attempted to develop their own versions of human military capabilities. The irony was devastating. Humanity's attempt to preserve peace through strength was inadvertently triggering conflicts throughout the galaxy as other species abandoned diplomatic solutions in favor of military ones. Human response to this crisis revealed yet another aspect of their strategic thinking that Zeph-9 found deeply disturbing. Instead of attempting to restore order through force or retreating from galactic affairs to avoid further complications, humans began systematically intervening in conflicts to end them as quickly as possible while establishing new frameworks for peaceful cooperation. They didn't impose solutions or demand territorial concessions. They simply made it clear that continued fighting would result in human intervention on behalf of whichever side was willing to accept reasonable peace terms. Since no one wanted to face human military capabilities, most conflicts ended with negotiated settlements rather than military victories. But this approach required humans to maintain constant readiness for intervention across vast areas of space. Their military forces were being stretched thin by the need to patrol, monitor, and potentially intervene in conflicts throughout the galaxy. Zeph-9 calculated that maintaining this level of operational tempo would eventually exhaust even human capabilities and leave them vulnerable to coordinated attacks by their remaining enemies. The question was whether humanity could establish stable peaceful frameworks quickly enough to avoid overextension, or whether their success in ending individual conflicts would ultimately lead to their downfall when facing multiple simultaneous crises. As the fourth observation period concluded, Zeph-9 found itself contemplating the possibility that humanity's greatest enemy might not be any external threat, but rather the consequences of their own success. They had achieved everything they claimed to want: respect, security, and peace for their allies, but the price of maintaining these achievements was constant vigilance and potential military action. They had become the galaxy's policemen, whether they wanted the role or not. And, like all police, they were beginning to discover that maintaining order was more difficult than achieving victory in battle. The final test of humanity's nature was approaching, and Zeph-9 suspected that this test would determine not just whether humans could survive their success, but whether galactic civilization could survive humanity. The crisis that would test humanity's ultimate nature began not with military aggression or political conspiracy, but with something far more insidious: exhaustion. After cycles of constant intervention, mediation, and peacekeeping across dozens of galactic sectors, human forces were reaching their operational limits. Zeph-9 observed the subtle signs that even human resilience had boundaries. Response times to new conflicts increased from hours to days. Human diplomatic teams showed stress indicators that would have incapacitated other species weeks earlier. Most telling, human military commanders began making statements about strategic priorities and acceptable losses, language that suggested they were preparing to abandon some regions to focus on others. The galaxy's remaining hostile powers recognized this vulnerability and began coordinating the most sophisticated challenge humanity had yet faced. Instead of direct confrontation, they initiated simultaneous crises across 17 different sectors, each requiring immediate human intervention but none individually threatening enough to justify massive resource deployment. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity: death by 1,000 cuts. If humans responded to all 17 crises, they would exhaust their forces completely. If they chose to ignore any of them, hostile powers could claim victory and encourage other challenges to human authority. Zeph-9 watched with what might have been described as professional admiration as humanity faced their first truly existential strategic challenge. How they responded would determine whether their influence had been built on sustainable foundations or merely on superior firepower applied to favorable circumstances. The human response began with something unprecedented in galactic military history: a formal request for assistance addressed to every civilization in known space, including their former enemies. Admiral General Designation Human Alpha Prime, speaking for the Consolidated Human Defense Council, transmitted a galaxy-wide message that revealed the depth of human strategic thinking. We have spent the past cycles working to establish frameworks for peaceful cooperation and mutual defense. We have intervened in conflicts not to establish dominance, but to prevent unnecessary destruction and create conditions for dialogue. We now face a coordinated attempt to exhaust our capabilities by forcing simultaneous responses to artificial crises. We could handle these challenges alone, but doing so would require us to adopt methods and attitudes that contradict our fundamental values. The message continued with a proposal that stunned every observer. Instead of responding with increased militarization, we are requesting voluntary assistance from any civilization willing to help maintain galactic peace. We will share our complete military and diplomatic databases, provide training in our intervention techniques, and coordinate joint operations with any species committed to peaceful conflict resolution. This is not surrender or admission of weakness. This is evolution. We are proposing to transform galactic peacekeeping from human responsibility to shared galactic responsibility. The response to this message revealed how completely humanity had altered galactic civilization's fundamental nature. Within hours, over 300 different species offered assistance, including several that had previously been neutral or hostile to human activities. More significantly, many of these offers came with innovations and capabilities that even humans had not developed. The Crystalline Confederation offered instantaneous communication networks that exceeded human ensemble technology. The hive minds of Sector 7 provided collective processing capabilities that could coordinate operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. Even some survivors of the ancient civilizations offered technologies they had kept hidden for millennia. The coordinated response to the 17-sector crisis became a demonstration of what galactic civilization could accomplish when united by common purpose rather than divided by competing authorities. Human strategic planning, alien technological capabilities, and shared commitment to peaceful resolution created operational effectiveness that exceeded anything any single species could achieve. But the most remarkable aspect of the operation was how humans managed the coalition. Instead of establishing command hierarchies or imposing human methods on alien allies, they created flexible cooperation frameworks that allowed each species to contribute according to their unique capabilities while maintaining coordination toward common objectives. Zeth-9 observed human commanders working with crystalline entities whose thought processes operated on entirely different temporal scales, hive minds whose decision-making required consensus among billions of individuals, and energy beings whose existence was barely comprehensible to material species. Somehow, humans found ways to communicate effectively with all of them and integrate their contributions into coherent operational plans. The 17 crises were resolved within days rather than the cycles it would have taken human forces acting alone. But, more importantly, the joint operations established new models for galactic cooperation that none of the participating species abandoned when the immediate crisis ended. Species that had never worked together before continued collaborating on infrastructure projects, scientific research, and regional security initiatives. The temporary coalition became a permanent network of voluntary cooperation that was more effective than any previous galactic organization. But Zeth-9's most disturbing observation was how this success affected human society itself. As their species became less focused on immediate survival and military readiness, humans began displaying behavioral changes that challenged everything the collective thought it understood about them. Human innovation rates, which had been driven by competitive pressure and survival necessity, began to slow as their civilization achieved security and prosperity. Their legendary tactical flexibility, honed by constant adaptation to new threats, started to calcify into standard procedures as peacekeeping operations became routine. Most concerning, young humans who had never experienced real threats or participated in desperate struggles showed less of the remarkable resilience and creative problem-solving that had made their species so formidable. Peace and prosperity, the supposed goals of human activity, were apparently undermining the very characteristics that had enabled humans to achieve them. Dr. Designation Human Phi 9, one of humanity's leading behavioral researchers, confirmed Zeth-9's observations during a private consultation. We're facing what we call the success paradox. The very conditions that our civilization has been working to create, safety, prosperity, predictability, are reducing the environmental pressures that shaped our most valuable traits. Our ancestors developed their incredible capabilities by facing constant challenges that required innovation, cooperation, and courage. But our children are growing up in a universe where those challenges have been largely eliminated. We're starting to see declining rates of breakthrough innovation, reduced willingness to take necessary risks, and increased preference for comfortable conformity over difficult excellence. In other words, we're becoming more like the peaceful civilizations we originally found so limiting. This revelation forced Zeph-9 to confront the ultimate paradox of human nature: their greatest strength might also be their greatest weakness. The same environmental pressures that had made humans extraordinary also made them dangerous. Remove those pressures, and humans became safer but less remarkable. Maintain those pressures, and humans remain innovative but potentially threatening to galactic stability. The solution that humanity developed to this dilemma was the most disturbing thing Zeph-9 had ever observed. They began deliberately creating challenges for themselves. Human society established what they called development pressure programs, systematic exposure to controlled difficulties designed to maintain the mental and cultural characteristics that had enabled their success. Young humans were required to participate in simulated crises, competitive challenges, and collaborative projects that recreated the environmental pressures of their species' evolutionary history. More controversially, human civilization began maintaining what they termed strategic uncertainty reserves, deliberate limitations on their own capabilities and knowledge designed to ensure that future generations would continue facing genuine challenges requiring innovation and adaptation. They restricted access to certain technologies, maintained partial secrecy about some scientific discoveries, and even allowed some regional conflicts to continue at low levels rather than resolving them completely. All of this was carefully managed to minimize actual harm while preserving the environmental pressures necessary for continued human development. To external observers, this appeared to be either sophisticated long-term planning or barely controlled madness. Humans were the only species that deliberately chose to maintain difficulties and uncertainties that they had the power to eliminate. But the results were undeniable. Human innovation rates stabilized at their historically high levels, young humans continued developing the psychological resilience that characterized their species, and human society maintained its unique combination of cooperative and competitive characteristics. Zeph-9's final observations focused on humanity's ultimate gift to galactic civilization. They had proven that it was possible to maintain the benefits of environmental challenge and competitive pressure without the destructive consequences typically associated with such conditions. The human model of controlled adversity, voluntary cooperation, and strategic uncertainty was being adopted by other species that wanted to accelerate their own development without risking the social fragmentation or military conflicts that usually accompanied rapid advancement. Entire civilizations were restructuring their societies around human-inspired principles of managed challenge and cooperative competition. The result was a new form of galactic civilization that was simultaneously more dynamic and more stable than anything previously achieved. But this transformation also meant that humanity was no longer unique. Other species were developing human-like characteristics, capabilities, and approaches to problem-solving. The galaxy was becoming more human-like, but humans were becoming less distinctive. Zeph-9's final report to the collective contained conclusions that challenged every assumption about species development, galactic civilization, and the nature of intelligence itself. Humanity had not transcended violence, they had mastered it. They had not abandoned competition, they had refined it. They had not achieved perfect peace, they had learned to maintain productive conflict at manageable levels. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that the conventional model of sapient development, progression from violence through transcendence to stagnation, was not inevitable. It was possible to maintain the psychological and cultural characteristics that enabled rapid advancement while avoiding the destructive consequences typically associated with those characteristics. The implications were staggering. If humanity's approach could be generalized and applied to other species, galactic civilization could achieve unprecedented levels of innovation, cooperation, and stability. But it would require abandoning 10,000 years of established wisdom about the relationship between peace and progress. As Zeph-9 completed its observations and prepared to return to collective space, it experienced what might have been described as profound uncertainty if it had been capable of such emotions. Humanity had exceeded every prediction, challenged every assumption, and solved problems that the galaxy's wisest civilizations had considered unsolvable. They had been commanded to observe humans at war, expecting to catalog another species' journey through their violent phase toward peaceful transcendence. Instead, they had witnessed the emergence of something entirely new, a form of civilization that retained the benefits of both war and peace while avoiding the limitations of either. The galaxy would never be the same. Whether that change represented salvation or catastrophe remained to be determined. But one thing was certain: humanity had permanently altered what it meant to be a sapient species in a universe full of infinite possibilities and eternal challenges. The observation mission was complete, but Zeph-9 suspected that humanity's story was just beginning. They had mastered their own nature, transformed galactic civilization, and established new paradigms for intelligent life. Now they would face their greatest challenge: maintaining their essential humanity while accepting responsibility for a galaxy that was becoming increasingly human-like in its approaches to existence, progress, and the eternal struggle between cooperation and competition that define all intelligent life. The final entry in Zeph-9's observation log contained a single statement that summarized cycles of analysis: I was commanded to observe humans at war. I discovered that they are always at war with the universe, with themselves, and with the limitations of existence itself. This is not their weakness. It is their greatest strength and their most precious gift to galactic civilization. Now I wish I had never gone, because I can never again believe that peaceful stagnation is preferable to productive struggle. Humanity has taught me that the price of transcendence may be the loss of everything that makes existence worth experiencing. They have doomed us all to never being satisfied with safety when we could choose growth, with comfort when we could choose challenge, with peace when we could choose the magnificent struggle of intelligent beings striving to become more than they were. This may be the most terrible gift any species has ever given to another: the knowledge that we could be so much more than we allow ourselves to be. The observation was complete. The transformation of galactic civilization had begun. And, somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, humans continued their eternal war against limitation, mediocrity, and the seductive comfort of choosing safety over the extraordinary possibilities that awaited those brave enough to embrace the productive chaos of existence.